Suicide Note by Mitchell Heisman. This work is a computer-generated reading of Suicide Note by Mitchell Heisman. This work is free and licensed by Mitchell Heisman for copying and distribution under a Creative Commons Attribution Non-Commercial No Derivative Works 3.0 United States license. Where pragmatism doesn't work. The pragmatism of William James, declared Benito Mussolini in an interview on April 11, 1926, was of great use to me in my political career. James taught me that an action should be judged rather by its results than by its doctrinary basis. I learned of James that faith in action, that ardent will to live and fight, to which fascism owes a great part of its success. For me the essential was to act. 1295. Truth, for Mussolini, could be whatever was useful in crushing or murdering democratic opponents of fascism. Exploiting the labor of conquered and colonized peoples in Ethiopia and elsewhere was surely pragmatic. The use of humans as slaves, tools, and means for other humans would be the fruition of a truly pragmatic worldview. Yet Mussolini's appropriation of James's ideas only made obvious how culture-bound this Yankee philosophy was. Mussolini had different ends than James, and this made all the difference. The fascist leader teased out of the implications of pragmatism that are softened by the provincial context of American culture that pragmatism was meant to complement utilitarianism. Emphasizes the means as the problem, and de-emphasizes problem of ends. Yet there is no way to understand Anglo-Saxon pragmatism utilitarianism without a historical understanding of the ends implicitly advanced by this philosophy of means. If good amounts to the technologically functionality, this raises the question of the purpose that any given means functions for. Utilitarianism and pragmatism apparently work for democratic ends, but what ends are served by democracy? The English utilitarian Jeremy Bentham declared the notion of natural and inviolable rights as nonsense upon stilts. While human rights were nonsense, they could be useful nonsense. Rights were only a useful means to an end. But to what end? The Norman conquest, he correctly pointed out, was not undertaken in order to institute the principle of the greatest happiness of the greatest number. The free Saxon system of local courts and juries was too favorable to justice to be endured by lawyers and was replaced a system of centralized courts and language known by the few for the few. 129 was utilitarianism liberal broad-mindedness, tribal warfare, or both if judged by actual behavior. The political end that utilitarianism served, it seems, was the conquest of the conquest. The utilitarians implicitly believed that ideas of human rights and notions of the primitive common law were only imperfect tools to anti-Norman ends. This primitive common law, declared Richard Carlile, is no more than nonsense, and productive of nothing but common mischief. When experience teaches that there is no other means of obtaining beneficial changes in the political state of our country 1297 other than through parliamentary means, perhaps its prime disqualification is simply that of failing the test of historical survival. If recourse to this primitive Saxon constitutionalism repeatedly demonstrated its own fruitlessness, perhaps one needs let go of the old and try something that is new and, above all, effective. This seemed to be the approach of the utilitarians. Whether English utilitarians or American pragmatists, a common Anglo-Saxon cultural theme is the assumption of the rightness of democratic political ends. If utilitarianism is traced to its Puritan cultural origins, then its original political ends become clear. According to an essay called Southern Civilization, or The Norman in America in DeBow's Review, 1862, and the machinations of this Presbyterian, or Puritan party, was but the Herculean effort of the Saxon to wrest from the Norman the scepter of empire, making religious fanaticism only the cloak for concealing his political designs. 1298 Now that is pragmatism. The Puritan used a radicalized Protestantism to help bring down the Norman conquerors. This is the socio-biological origins of utility-pragmatism, the utility of God as a mask for ethnic conflict. Once John Locke had secularized the basic Puritan philosophy into a basis for liberal democratic rights, then this, nonsense on stilts became useful in bringing down the Norman slave masters of the American South as well. Pragmatism emerged from a post-Civil War world where the obvious implication of using human beings as ends could be pragmatically dismissed after the defeat of Southern slavery. Pragmatism arose in a culture where destroying Norman slave masters became its overriding end. This precluded Americans from interpreting pragmatism as a philosophy that implicated using humans purely as means, as slaves. The fascist potential of pragmatism, however, was clear enough for Mussolini. The American utopia is anti-utopian. Pragmatism is especially useful for Americans because, unlike most other peoples, Americans have ideas at the center of their national self-identity. Most people are not dependent on explicit ideas such as equality and thus do not require pragmatism as a means of cheating a strict interpretation of those ideas. Idealized American political principles provide the unreachables and pragmatism provides the way to get around them. The socio-biological origins of utile pragmatism can be traced to Anglo-Saxon adaptation to being compromised by their conquerors. The extremes of the selfish gene were especially compromised so that Anglo-Saxon nationalism as an end in itself became permanently compromised. For the Anglo-Saxons, not political idealism, but pragmatism evolved as a form of socio-biological adaptationism. For the Germans, by contrast, political idealism became realized through Nazi genetic racial ends. It was precisely through compromising extreme of genetic ends that the new technological end gradually arose to fill its place. Pragmatism, in this sense, is the cultural expression of a transition from compromised biology to compromised technology. With the full political implication of kin selection frustrated by the Normans, compromised Anglo-Saxon socio-biological development provided an opportunity for economic technological development to take its place. The pragmatic transition from biological evolution to technological evolution is characterized by the liberation of individual selfishness at the expense of the individual's selfish genes, instead of the subordination of individuals to propagation. Selfish genes subordinated to selfish individuals. Instead of the individual adapting so that the genes can survive, the genes adapt so that the individual can survive. Adaptation to survive is displaced by those who survive to adapt. With the extreme genetic end ultimately abandoned in America, the extreme technological end, God, was taken to its extreme. Technology overtakes biology. Radical pragmatism culminates in the technological singularity. American pragmatism, after all, is a technological worldview moderated by a vague humanism. Both the technological assumptions underlying pragmatism and the undefined vagueness of the human will become increasingly problematic as artificially intelligent life forms take modernity to its extreme. When technological evolution reaches the point where the question is no longer the usefulness of machines to humans, but the usefulness of humans to machines, that is the point where pragmatism no longer works. Pragmatism entailed the subordination of truth to happiness. True to the principle of utility, American pragmatists have ignored truths that are not useful to themselves. The true pragmatists are those who have never heard of James or his philosophy but lie and claim they have if it is to their advantage to do so.